Hello and welcome to my review of the Walking Dead graphic novel Compendium 1. I assume everybody by now knows what the Walking Dead story is about, but if you don't know, the main character, Rick Grimes, wakes up from a coma and the whole world has turned into zombies. So the story follows his journey into finding his family and to basically just trying to stay alive in this new world order. I've never seen the TV show, so I only know what happened in this first compendium, but I feel really torn in two by this book because the concept is so cool. It's such an interesting idea. The whole world is practically ended and you just don't know what's going on. But the authors didn't seem to know when to stop. They just turned that angst meter right up to 11 and didn't turn it down the entire time you were reading. So it felt like every page something earth-shattering was happening and there was no downtime, there was no ability to get to know the characters, and I felt like I was constantly on the edge of a nervous breakdown when I was reading this. And I think the story would have really benefited from having a lot of downtime and having a lot of development between the characters and how they relate to each other in this new scenario, in the new situation. Okay, so this place isn't safe anymore, now we have to move, and just enjoying those in-between moments better. And then hitting us over the head with the baseball bat because, oh, there's still zombies around. But when something so huge was happening with almost every page, it was just too much to deal with. I could only read like a couple of pages at a time, so it took me ages to finish. The main character, Rick Grimes, he starts off the book and he's really nice, he's caring, and he's very sensitive, and he worries about his family, and he's very caring towards the others around him. But then the situation dictates that he kind of descends into being the kind of person who's like, we're all gonna die and everything is shit. And that was a really interesting descent to watch. This going from the sensitive and caring to we have to kill everybody because that's the only way we're gonna survive. It was interesting, but it felt like we just went. There wasn't a journey from one point to the other point. We were just hitting the bullet points and it wasn't very fleshed out. Interesting, but needed more. But what I found really strange was that a couple of times there were conversations specifically about women and women's rights. There was one at the beginning and one towards the end that I remember specifically. It was maybe more in the middle, but I can't remember. At the beginning, it was the men were going hunting and the women were going to wash the clothes. And somebody was like, oh, why do the men go hunting and none of the men do the clothes washing? And then one of the other characters just piped up with, this isn't about women's rights, this is about who does what and being efficient. And then the scenario at the end, towards the end of the book, was they made a group council with everybody who's still left alive. And there were no women on the group, despite the group being almost half and half by this point. And somebody specifically said, oh, there's no women on this group. And one of the other characters was just like, yeah, that's the way everyone wanted it. None of the women wanted to be on the team. And it's like, well, okay, maybe that's possible. But it felt like it was just an excuse for the writers to be lazy and that, oh, well, we want this book to be about zombies and zombies eating people. And we can't be bothered to figure out all this women's rights and sexism and how that relates with the new social dynamic we're in. Yeah, it just felt like an excuse to not have to deal with that. They did invent the character Michonne, who kind of bucked the trend of all the other women who were in the group, but she's kind of the exception that proves the rule. And then there's that scene towards the end involving Michonne, where if you've read this, or I assume it's also in the TV series, that because she's not babysitting, something really bad happens to her. So it kind of feels like, oh, that's your fault because you weren't babysitting. I really enjoyed the art style, actually. I thought the art style was really cool, and it was a very interesting choice to decide to do it in black and white rather than in colour, because the subject matter is so graphic. There's people getting their faces ripped off and their throats are getting eaten and guts and blood are going everywhere. And if that had been in colour, I think your focus would have been on the gore and the gore of each scenario. But the writers did seem to want to make the impact of each scene about what had happened rather than just the happening. So we didn't have all the blood and guts in full rendered colour. We had them in blacks, whites, tones of grey, so we could focus more on the horror and how that affected the characters. But I didn't go much deeper than that. Although interestingly, I thought the internal consistency of the art style was a bit off, actually. So they did have two different pencilers drawing this out, so I assume that's why. But from one page to another, some of the characters just looked so different, like their facial features were going in different directions, and there were some times where I assumed when I flipped the page that this was a new character, but it was actually just the same character, potentially drawn by the other artist, which felt kind of weird. It would have been nice if they'd maybe worked together a bit more or practiced a bit more together to try and get that style down and get the characters' facial features more exact. Especially when characters were starting to change their outfits, put on hats or shave their heads or whatever, then suddenly, oh well, you don't have that hairstyle to rely on, and you didn't really have the facial expressions and the facial structures to rely on, so it got a bit hard to tell who's who. And weirdly enough, the kids, couple of kids who were like 7 or 8, a lot of the time they looked like adults, which was really weird. They had these big heads and adult faces in tiny little children bodies. So I did enjoy reading this book, but I needed to take my time. It's not the kind of thing that you can just blast through, because it really did give me nightmares. Like, honestly, I had nightmares reading this book, trying to figure out what they could possibly do next to stay safe and find food and things like that. And I would like to read the second one, because I really want to find out where the story goes. It ended on such a big cliffhanger, and I'm like, oh no, what are they gonna do? But I don't know if my nerves can handle it. I hope you enjoyed this brief review of the Walking Dead Compendium 1 graphic novel. And I hope I'll see you in my next video, because it's probably going to be something interesting.